how to synthesize the spiky-shaped niobium oxide particles, and then how it's stable and useful as solid acid catalysts. So I will start with the background first. So in chemical industry, the homogeneous catalysts are mostly used to synthesize the chemical products, such as the hydrochloride, hydrophosphate. And the major problem of the homogeneous catalysts is their separation is difficult because of their high solubility to the solvent. So to achieve the sustainable society, the environmentally friendly the chemical processes are necessary. So the green catalysts, like an efficient, the recoverable, and the recyclable catalysts are required to achieve such green processes. So the heterogeneous the catalysts, in other words, the solid acid catalysts, are easy to separate and reuse. So because of their large size and insolubility. And the niobium oxides, such as the niobic acid and the niobium pentoxides, are promising solid acids because of their water-tolerant acidity. So Professor Hara group in 2011, so they belonging to the Tokyo Institute of Technology reports the niobic acid does not lose its Lewis acidity in water. So also the high stability of the niobium oxides is the advantage of the solid acid catalysts. So the catalysts, the niobic acid catalyst can be alternative to the homogeneous catalysts, but the major disadvantage of the solid acids is they exhibit the lower reactivity than the homogeneous catalyst. So the many researchers they consider downscaling the particle size of the niobium oxides from the micro to the nanoscale and controlling their morphology to enhance their catalytic activity. So recently, Dr. Crace synthesized nanoseed of the niobium oxides, and its acidity was compared with the bulk niobium oxides. They revealed the niobium oxides nanoseeds have large oxygen vacancy, and the formation of the oxygen vacancy creates new Lewis acid sites. So nanonization of the solid acid is advantageous for improving their catalytic activity, but the nano-sized materials tend to exhibit poor stability and recoverability. So especially the 10 nanometer of the particles, which can show their higher activity, catalytic activity, but it cannot be corrected by a conventional separation method due to their very small size. Additionally, the surface of the catalyst is blocked by reactants, the productants, the solvent, and the byproducts, etc. So washing or the summer cleaning is necessary after the reaction. But the nanoscale catalysis is easy to aggregate and to be sintered in reaction and or the summer cleaning steps. So from these points of view, so we thought that the three-dimensional nano-architecture is more useful as solid acid catalysis. So because it will simultaneously have high catalytic activity, durability, and recyclability. So especially we focused on the spiky structure. The spiky structure composed of the large core and the nano-sized rods like outer shell of the sea urchin. So it is easy to separate due to the large hole size. Also, their nanorods on spiky-shaped particles will show the high reactivity, like the single-size nanoparticles. And also, the three-dimensionally, the hierarchical structure will have durability in a reaction or the thermal cleaning. Okay, let me first I will show you how to synthesize and control the spiky structure by the hydrothermal treatment. So here is a synthesis procedure. 20 millimolar of niobium oxide solution was the mixed surfactant solution and transferred into the hydrosalmon vessel. So, and then the hydrosalmon treatment was conducted at 200 degrees C for the 2 hours. So as you can see, the rod-shaped nanoparticles were formed when niobium to oxalate ion mass ratio was 1 to 2, and the lengths of the major and the minor axis of the dispersed the nanorods were about 20 and 5 to 8 nanometer. So in contrast, the increasing oxides the ratio, the particle shape transformed to the spiky shape composed of a spherical core and the numerous nanorods. So these grow radially on the surface. So the length of the minor axis of the nanorods on the spiky-shaped particles was 5 to 10 nanometer, as same as dispersed nanorods. And by addition of acetate instead of the oxalic acid, the wire-shaped niobium oxide was obtained. So these results suggested that the morphology change from nanorods to spiky shape was triggered by binding of oxalate ions. So here is XRD analysis of nanorods and the spiky particles. So nanorods and spiky-shaped niobium oxide showed the same XRD patterns. And we attributed sharp peaks at around the 22 degree and 46 degree to the 001 and 002 planes of the pseudo-hexagon structure. Lattice spacing calculated from the lattice fringes of nanorods and nanorods on the spiky particles were also same. So these results clearly indicated that both nanorods had the same crystal structure that grew in the 001 direction. So here are TEM images of the spiky particles synthesized by changing the niobium oxide concentrations. So the reaction time was fixed for 2 hours. So interestingly, although the whole diameter of the spiky niobium oxide particles increased with increasing of the niobium concentration, the diameters of the nanorods were not changed. So this feature should be advantageous for the large-scale synthesis of the spiky particles. So here, I summarized an average hole diameter and the length of the minor axis of the nanorods on the spiky particles. So these are estimated from the TM images. The average hole diameters were clearly increased by the increasing the niobium concentration. On the other hand, the average length of the nanorods was around 5 to 10 nanometer, and it was relatively constant. So accordingly, the initial concentration of the niobium oxalates affects only the core particle size, and the nanorods were grown after the formation of the spherical core. So here is a spiky-shaped niobium oxide synthesized by changing the reaction time from 2 to 20 hours. So increasing synthesis time, the whole diameter decreased from 156 nanometer to the 106 nanometer. So there is no significant difference between the average length of the minor axis of the nanorods. But, so as you can see, so tabular-shaped nanocrystals was observed on the tip of the nanorods. The tabular-shaped nanocrystals was not adsorbed on the nanorods, but it was completely fused with the nanorods. So suggesting the tabular nanocrystals were grown on the tip of the nanorods. So considering the decrease of the particle size and the morphology change with increasing reaction time, the niobium oxide nanoparticles were dissolved and recrystallized during the hydrosalmon treatment. So from the synthesis results, we thought that the oxide ions are absorbed on the surface. So here the proofs. So from the TG-DTA curves of the spiky-shaped nanoparticles and the FDR of the spiky-shaped particles, so oxalic acid or the formic acid was absorbed to the specific surface area. So we thought that the spiky-shaped forms, as shown here, the spherical core glues by self-assembly of the multiple nuclei or amorphous niobium oxide particles, so which facilitated in the primary stage by the adsorption of oxalic ions. So oxalic ions should be functioned as the bridging ligands because it has two carboxylate groups. And then the nanorods grew on the surface through a dissolution, the precipitation processes. And here, the oxalic acid also functioned to suppress growth of the AB crystal plane and create a nanorod structure. Okay, then next I will talk how spiky structure is stable and function as a loose acid catalyst. For the thermal stability evaluations, nanorods and the spiky-shaped particles were put on the PT coated the glass substrate and calcined at from 150 to the 600 degrees C in air. So as you can see, the nanorods on the surface of the spiky particles remained even after the 400 degrees C calcination. So in contrast, the dispersed nanorods aggregated and sintered after the calcination. So microstructure and the thermal stability of the spiky particles were further investigated with low voltage FE-SEM observations. So as you can see, the numerous 1D nanodes grew radially and situated apart from each other. So that is the nanorods on the one spiky particles were not in contact with others. So these nanorod structures were retained after calcination in air at temperatures from 200 degrees C to 400 degrees C. But finally, upon the annealing at the 600 degrees C, so most of the nanorods disappeared and the niobium oxides particles with a rough surface were obtained. And in contrast to SEM observations, the bed surface area decreased after the 200 degrees C the calcinations. So this is now I'm thinking probably due to sintering among aggregated spiky particles. So here is the N2 adsorption curves of the spiky particles. Like the other synthesized spiky particles, the samples calcined from the 150 to the 250 degrees C showed type 2 absorption with no hysteresis. So this indicated that the calcination process did not induce structure change. The hysteresis observed in the N2 adsorption of the spiky particles calcined at 400 degrees C. So this indicated mesopore formation by sintering of the contacted nanorods among the aggregated spiky particles. The results of the TEM, SEM, XRD, and adsorption analysis clearly indicated that the niobium oxide particles with spiky structure showed sintering resistivity until 300 degrees C, even though the size of their surface structure is single nanoscale. So this feature is advantage for the thermal cleaning. Okay, here, so we thought an origin of the stability of the spiky particles, large space among surface nanostructures, and crystal orientation of the nanorods. So among nanorods on the spiky-shaped niobium oxides, there are 5 to 10 nanometer of rod-to-rod distance. So elongating the traveling distance of the constituent atoms. So also material diffusion proceeds at contact points. So therefore, the sintering is less likely to occur with nanorods aligned without contacting each other with large spaces. And furthermore, considering the spiky structure forms not by random aggregation of nanorods, but by growing nanorods with the same crystal orientation from a spherical core. So adjacent nanorods have energetically equivalent planes, and the materials or atoms are difficult to diffuse among the crystal-oriented nanods. So here is our hypothesis of the thermal stability of the spiky particles. Okay, let's move to the catalytic activity. But before discussing about catalytic activity, so I want you to remember about acid amount evaluation results. So although the calcined nanorods and spiky particles have different morphology, there was no difference in acid amounts per the surface. However, the calcined spiky particles show a higher catalytic activity than nanorods. So the catalytic activity was evaluated from the yield of phenylacetonitrile produced by this reaction. So although the acid amounts of the calcium nanodes and the spiky Niobium oxide particles were same, the spiky Niobium oxide particles exhibited the greater activity than the nanorods after calcination at 400 degrees C. So this is because the nanorods on spiky Niobium oxide particles had sintering resistivity in contrast to the nanorods. The retained single nanoscale nanodes grown in the 0-1 direction would be active sites for this reaction. So here, the acid sites of the samples were characterized using CO adsorption followed by FTIR measurements to gain further insights into the sample's microstructure and acidity. The spiky particles calcined at 400 degrees C showed 3 sharp peaks, which are attributed to physical CO and CO adsorbed onto prostate acid and less acid sites. So its FTIR spectra was similar to that amorphous Niobium oxide. So by contrast, the nanorods calcined at 400 degrees C showed a sharp and asymmetric peaks. So because the peak at 2162 attributed to prostate site is weak, so it overlapped the peak of the CO species adsorbed on the Lewis acid sites. I think the NB O bonds in distorted porphyria are more in the spiky particles. The Raman spectra also show the same tendency. So distortion of the Nb O structure in spiky-shaped Nb oxide particles. The other synthesized Nb oxide particles show broad vibration bands similar to amorphous Niobic acid, indicating that Nb porphyria and their networks of nanorods and spiky particles have flexibility and disorder similar to those of amorphous Niobic acid. The spectrum of the spiky Niobium oxide particles calcined at 400 degrees C showed a broader band at around 550 to the 700 than the calcined nanorods. So according to other works, the Nb O polyhedral networks of the nanoscale Niobium oxide exhibits greater flexibility and disorder than those of bulk Niobium oxides. So because the single nanoscale structure on spiky Niobium particles was retained after the calcination, so spiky particles exhibited a looser network structure than the calcined nanorods. So considering all the results, the retained single nanoscale nanodes is active sites for the reactions. Okay, so here is the conclusion. So we started this research with one question. So where the spiky shape can show the high catalyst activity, durability, and recyclability simultaneously. So the work is not sufficient, but we can conclude that the spiky shaped Niobium oxide particles were stable in thermal purification process, and their largely ground nanorods the function as a Lewis acid catalysis. Okay, thank you for listening.